Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the first edition of Conversations with James Freel. You may be familiar with my regular podcast. I've been hinting at it for a long time. I'm finally coming through in the clutch with it. I have my first guest. My guest, his name is Mark Phillips.
Hello.
He is a videographer, has the heart of a philanthropist. Mark, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi. Yeah. So I'm Mark Phillips. I'm a videographer, and I have the heart of a philanthropist. By that I mean I would like to be a philanthropist, but I'm currently in the position to get money. If anyone out there listening has money that they'd like to donate to a good cause of me needing food and shelter.
You sound like a middleman for a philanthropist. It's like,
if you know anybody, I know a guy who's trying to give out money or looking for people that want the money. So I like to volunteer my time. When I have money, I will donate my money as well as volunteering my time.
Good stuff, good stuff. So, full disclosure, I've known Mark for at least over a decade now,
Yeah,
I think.
Since junior high, at least.
Yeah, we went to the same schools. We have a lot of history, so hopefully this doesn't just turn into a bunch of inside jokes. But hopefully we have a good conversation ready for you. How have you been?
Good. Trying to think do you just want like a full recap of my life over the past 5 years?
Give me the highlights.
Okay, so I went to Ohio University. You know that much.
Yes.
Anyone listening, I went to Ohio University. Then I graduated, and my plan when I graduated, this is sort of a snippet of the past year. I think that'll be good enough. When I graduated, my plan was to eventually move out to LA, and I'm in Ohio right now, so you can see I did not go to LA.
By the way, we appreciate you making the trip to Toledo for us, where we broadcast from.
Yeah, more than happy to be here.
We don't broadcast, by the way. This isn't edited. But so originally you graduated. Your plan was LA.
Yeah. So my plan was to move to LA, and I had a bunch of friends at OU who also our whole plan as a group was to graduate and go to LA and just get jobs and eventually try to do our own thing as like a group of friends. And I graduated a semester earlier than that everyone in that group of friends. So I needed something to do. I didn't want to go out to LA immediately. My plan was to go somewhere to get a little bit more experience, like in the work field. My job planned to get a job as an editor, which worked out. Get some experience, save some money in a place where I could actually save money, unlike LA, where I would not be able to save any money. And then,
is that because of the cost of living?
Yeah,
it's just insane.
Yes.
If you wanted to, you'd probably be in a studio with 8 other people.
Yep. So go somewhere, work, save money, and then when my friends had graduated and my lease was up in Knoxville, which was this past January, I was going to move to LA. So I got a job in Knoxville as an assistant editor at a production company, which will remain unnamed because I have some things to say about it that aren't very nice. And so on a piece of paper, all that stuff looks really good, right? Mm-hmm. It's like I wanted to get a job in my field to save money and get experience. Yeah, check. I got it. Living the dream in Knoxville, Tennessee.
How tough was it to land that job?
Not really that tough, actually. So it was kind of weird. My brother knew somebody who was in his field of study, which is planetary geology.
Planetary geology?
Yeah.
That's like rocks, right?
Yes, but other rocks,
other
not Earth.
Rocks. Oh, okay.
Planetary rocks that aren't the third rock from the sun.
All they have is the moon right now, right?
Mars. He focuses on Mars.
Oh, okay, so we have rocks from Mars?
Well, so he studies data from the Mars rovers.
Got it.
And part of what he does, or at least he did, I don't know if he still does this, but part of his thing was analyzing the data from the rovers to figure out where water might have been, to try to figure out where life might be or where life could have been. He's working on something else right now, but I don't know enough about it to talk about it. He would actually, he's super interesting.
Oh, I'd love to hear about that, especially. It seems to me so improbable that there was life on Mars just because we're so close to. I mean, I guess bacteria would count as Mars.
Yeah, that's
a whole nother.
That's
subject.
what they're looking for. Yeah. It's just microscopic life, not intelligent.
Yeah.
Life.
So you were saying everything looks good on paper. You've got a job. So he knew someone at the.
Yeah, he knew someone who knew someone who knew someone.
Oh wow.
He knew a guy who worked for Scripps, which owns like HGTV and Discovery Channel.
Well, Discovery
Travel Channel, maybe, not Discovery Channel.
Are all those headquartered in Knoxville?
Wow. So he knew someone that worked there, and that person sent out an email to let everyone he knew, which was awesome, super generous thing to do. He didn't, like, I hadn't even met him at this point, and he sent an email out to all these different studios he knew and was like, hey, I know this guy that's coming in and he needs a job as an editor. Does anyone have any positions open? And then I got contacted, and then I got hired. It's like, wow, that's so super cool.
I'm kind of, how was his job as a planetary geologist related to these studios?
I don't think it was. So this guy was one of those guys that just like kind of does whatever is in front of him. And I think just because by sheer fact that there's so many different studios in the area, he somehow ended up being a production assistant on set, like a grip, essentially, like setting up lights, tearing stuff down.
Yeah.
So he knew people through that, and I'm not sure exactly how this guy ended up in like a planetary geology grad
Sounds
program.
like there's like a jack of all trades.
Yeah, he also plays drums for a Talking Heads cover band.
Really?
Yeah. They were in Cincinnati a couple years ago. I don't know if you.
I recently got into Talking Heads. I like them a lot.
They're cool. I'm seeing David Byrne in August.
Really?
Yeah.
You're seeing him in August? Where's he going to be at? Free ad.
The River Bends.
So he's just himself now. It's not Talking Heads.
No, yeah.
Okay. So you got this job.
I got this job, and
how would you describe your experience there?
Excruciating. So first off, it wasn't I knew going in that it wasn't a long-term position, but the way that they told me, I was filling in for someone who was on vacation, but the way that they presented it to me, they made it seem like it was just sort of like a test, like a trial period to see how I fit in with the company, to see if I was working well. I was like, cool, yeah, that's of course, like, sure, I'm happy to do that. And so they told me when I was in my interview that they were going to be paying me $15 an hour, and I said, cool.
Entry level in that field, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
Supply and demand, a lot of people want to get into this field.
Yeah, sure. I don't know. But then on my first day, I come in, and then the boss brings me in. He's like, actually, we can only pay you $12 an hour.
Ouch.
And I needed a job, and I was happy to have any sort of job in my area of study. So I was like, okay, that's fine. I was more happy to have a job than I was upset that I was not making what they had originally planned. But 12 to 15, that's a
jump.
That's not a small amount.
I think that's like,
I mean, if you're
$6,000 or $7,000 a year.
Yeah, if you're working 8 hours a day, which I was, it's $24 a day, which, that's not nothing.
Yeah. How would you describe it? Because I've worked in several different office environments, but I've never worked in the entertainment industry. And
not entertaining.
So is it a tense environment? What are the office politics like?
Not tense at all. I would imagine. I mean, I've never worked in any other type of office environment that isn't production, but this place in particular was super relaxed. No one did anything. That's the secret. And some guy a coworker, I mean, I was friends with a lot of these people. They were all very friendly. But one day I came in, And this was actually, so at this point, it was past my trial period where the lady I was filling in for had
How did that end? Did they just say, you're fit, come on in?
It's a stupid story, I'll tell it, though. I just want to finish this.
Sure, yeah.
First, though. So, it was past when I had finished mine, like 3 months or whatever, and they told me they didn't have enough work to keep me on. I was a little disappointed, but that was okay, because I didn't really like it. But they told me that when they had extra work that needed to be done, they would call me and ask me to come in, and I said, sure, that works, and they did. And so it was one of these times where I had come in just because they were short, and they needed, so a lot of this stuff had a really quick turnaround time, so they needed hands on deck. When they had footage come in, they needed people to get it turned around, but they didn't constantly have footage coming in. So it was just sort of
feast or famine.
Yeah. So one of the times I came in to do some assistant editing, which is, so it's called line editing. So, and these were all reality shows essentially that I was working on, and I won't mention the name of them because it would give away the production company. But one of them, there were like...
if you were to say it, I'm not asking you to, but would people recognize?
No.
Oh.
It's one of those reality shows where there are trivia questions at the end of before every commercial break. You know what I mean? Or I feel like there's a very specific type of reality show where there's some sort of trivia at the end before the commercial break to make sure that you come back to start because you want to know the answer to the trivia question. Yeah. It's that type of thing.
Okay.
But on this show, there were there were 2 handheld cameras that cameramen had, and 16 GoPros. So my job was to line up the footage of all these different GoPros and set cameras with the audio from an audio kit. And the only reason why this job exists is because they're using an outdated editing software. Literally, Adobe Premiere, you can right-click and hit synchronize and then buy audio. And it would do my job that I was doing for 40 hours a week in less than a minute.
Did they just not know about this?
No, they did. I told them. I was like, you don't need me. You don't need to pay me $12 an hour for 40 hours a week. You can just buy Adobe Premiere.
What software were they using?
So it's a software called Avid, and the only reason...
Oh, yeah. Oh, whoops. I clipped. Yeah.
Peek there.
Yeah, I clipped there. Actually, Pro Tools is made by Avid.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So the only reason why they were still using Avid, which is the first non-linear editor, so it's cool. It's I respect Avid, but I hate Avid.
Yeah.
I would never choose to use
That's
Avid.
what they trained us on at CTC.
It's garbage.
Yeah,
it's garbage software.
That's the weed out class I was in where I decided I can't. This is not for me.
Avid is hard to understand. Really? It's hard to use, even as an editor. I've been editing since 5th grade. It's hard. It's just very different from Final Cut or Premiere, which are the other 2 big boys. Yeah. So, and the only reason why they were using Avid is because they were using Avid's server. Avid has a specific server. I don't know what to call it,
cloud or just...
so it wasn't a cloud. It was in the building, but they had a software that went along with it. So it was, and it synced with it. Avid.
Okay.
It worked with Avid. It was called ISIS, actually.
What year was this?
This was 2017. But
okay,
they
so
named
this is
it,
full-fledged.
they named it before ISIS was ISIS. But that was actually one of the jokes in the office. Was we always talked about how the NSA was always listening to us, and we'd go ISIS, and then we'd say one of the coworkers' names, we'd just scream ISIS, and then. But yeah, so I was doing this. Wow, I got off track from the story. So
this is my problem.
No, it's
here. I go off the rails a lot because
everybody does.
Yeah, I'm just oh, that sounds cool. I want to dive into that.
Yeah, you go down the path that presents itself.
Writing stuff down because keep going though.
I was in one of these, they called me in because they needed extra hands on deck.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the guys, and I was blasting through this stuff because I'm a fast worker. I like to get my work done, and I wanted to make a good impression because when you're getting paid hourly, you don't want to seem like you're just hanging out, taking the money from the company.
Yeah.
So I was doing really what I thought was good work and efficient work, and my friend that worked there full time, he was like, I mean, I don't think he was salaried, but he had a full time position. He came up to me and he was like, "Hey man, like, you should slow down." And you're just like, he's like, if you can make the work that you're getting done in one day, you can make last 3 or 4 days. And I was like, I know, but I don't want to be dishonest. Like, it's not dishonest in that I'm telling a lie, but it's dishonest in that I'm stretching work out to get money. It's like, sure, that behooves me because I'm getting more money that way. Mm-hmm. I'm getting more for doing less. And it's like, who wouldn't want that? But I didn't want to be that type of person.
And this is where hearing something like that, that's where you get the idea that the environment there is people don't do anything. It's kind of a lazy work environment.
Yeah.
That's interesting because it's such a competitive environment, the entertainment industry.
You'd think.
Yeah, I would. Because there's nothing, it's sink or swim.
Yeah.
But I guess once you get a workforce going, there's no cushy union.
So this place that I worked for was really prominent in the 80s, which is weird. So they did a lot of shows for, like, Nickelodeon.
Really?
Which I don't think that would give it away. But yeah, so they got their start doing, like, kids shows, and now they're on to, like, reality TV, and it's just, I don't think anyone knows
Nickelodeon in the 80s was weird
about their stuff anymore.
I don't even think they did cartoons back then.
No, it was live shows.
Yeah.
Live action shows that this place I worked for did.
It's actually interesting. I was watching this old school, or this, like, it's a nostalgia channel, where they showed there's like this new technology that was being tested out with TVs, and it just made it more I'm gonna go off the rails here.
I'm ready for it.
It was actually started in Columbus, Ohio, or something. Where, I'm not going to be able to articulate this, so go ahead with what you were saying. People can look it up if they want.
Well, explain it. Explain a little bit more, just because I'm interested in that. If I was listening, I wouldn't know what to Google from that.
It was something along the lines of, this is like pre-internet days, so the idea of putting interaction between your television and the viewer was becoming this new thing, and they had all these different channels you could select. It wasn't quite cable, but it was cable before there was cable, and Nickelodeon had like the start of Nickelodeon started at this niche. It was just one of these several 12 different things you could pick from. I'm really doing a horrible job of explaining it, but it's just an interesting way that Nickelodeon started. It didn't start the way a traditional cable company. Just if you're interested, Google how Nickelodeon started, then they'll figure it out that way. The origins of it.
Explain it. Yeah. So, I was working, even though it was not for very long. I was working at this production company, and I just was really depressed.
Staring at a computer screen 8 hours a day.
Well, actually. So it was 8 hours a day, but also it sucked because it was actually 9 hours a day. So we got an hour for lunch, but it was unpaid.
Was part of your,
Yeah, so I was there from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. With an hour for lunch. Really, I could take the hour whenever I wanted, but typically people left at around noon. And a lot of people went out to lunch together, so it was just like, we're all going to some of the Five Guys. You want to come? And I'd have to be like, sure, because office socialization.
I hate that so much.
It's just so even it doesn't matter what industry you're in. There's those types of office politics.
One of the worst things I ever did was, I'm very socially incompetent. Many listeners of the show will know that. But I once got asked. And I'm gonna hold your place with what you were talking about.
Okay.
But I was in a cafeteria at the hospital I worked at, and it's very crowded at the cafeteria because they have indoor and outdoor seating, but it's the winter, so everyone's indoors, so it's very crowded. and I find an open table, and you have to sit there because it's so crowded. And I sit down, and like a fourth of the office is sitting at the table across from it. And I like to enjoy my lunch. During lunch, I like to sit with my smartphone and watch videos on YouTube from my channel, and I don't want to talk to people because I'm talking to people all day. I need a break from everyone. And my boss is like, Ben, come on, come sit with us. And I just stare at them and I go, nah.
No, you can't do that.
And then they're just like kind of dumbfounded, and I'm like, I'm sorry, I just need a break from socialization and stuff. And then they're like, oh, it's okay. And then the person I was working directly underneath, I told him about it, and I'm like, man, I feel so stupid. I should have just sat with them.
Yeah,
and
he's
just like,
suck it up.
He's like, yeah, you probably should.
Yeah.
But that was that. I felt really dumb about that afterwards.
It's all right.
But so you've got your office politics where you have to go wherever they're going, so you have to socialize.
Yeah, well, I think that's just typical office politics.
Yeah.
But I think the main point I was trying to make is that I was really unhappy in this job because the whole time I was doing it, like I said earlier, it was a job that not like in the future could be outsourced by computers. Like in the now, it's like I can go home and do this job in 1 minute. Like the job.
You could have gone home, taken all the information you have, and
yeah, I mean, all they had to do is use a different software. Honestly, there's even softwares like there's one called Pluralize, which does the same thing, where it takes audio and matches it with audio from it matches up audio, syncs it up.
Software engineers have figured all this stuff out.
Yeah, a long time ago. And the audio would already be semi-lined up due to time codes. They would put a time code on the camera, so they roughly started about the same point. So I would just be going through, and mind you, this was footage from like 8-hour days of shooting. So it wasn't like someone going out for like an hour or two and filming something. This was 3 days. So the show that I worked on took place over the course of, there were 3 days for the shoot, and each day was around 8 or 9 hours long. So I was scrolling through 8 or 9 solid hours worth of footage, and just going through it and looking at the waveforms from the audio and lining up as closely as I could, because the way video works, it's in frames, whereas audio, it's like you can get in closer to beyond a frame. So it's trying to get the audio as close as you could, the waveforms to match up within the frame. And then once it was all lined up, I would go through and delete all the audio that wasn't from the audio kits. And then once I did that, where there were any dead areas, so where the main cameras had been turned off but the GoPros were still running because the GoPros just kept running, I would take that footage and delete it. So I was
see a lot of footage of off air with the GoPros where like the producers are telling the people what to do.
There's not too much of that, but there was a little bit of that. Well, the best parts were hearing the cameramen talk to each other, and sometimes they would they would be like, man, when the editors listen to this, they're gonna think we're weird. You'd actually hear that kind of stuff, and I'd be like, yeah, you're right, I do think you're weird.
That was already broken.
Okay,
you don't have to worry about that. Every person who sat in that chair has done the same thing. Can I ask, and you may not be able to answer this, but was this show intended for U.S. audiences? Okay, it's kind of sounded like a South American type show.
I mean,
I might have to edit that out. That might have been insensitive of me.
I don't think
I've seen a lot of South American TV in my time.
Why?
It's a long story.
So, I was kind of depressed just by the sheer nature of the job I was doing.
Very monotonous.
And so
I'm guessing the show wasn't very good.
No, it was awful. I feel like I just want to tell you what the show is, so that
you don't have to. Yeah, write it down, and I'll Google it.
Yeah, just because it's so stupid.
Bring it up. I'm sorry for those of you listening. You're not going to be able to understand this, but maybe I'll let Mark say what he has to say about it. That sounds horrible.
But this is the thing that I don't know who's watching this. Did it not even have a Wikipedia page?
I could not. Is this it?
Yeah, yep.
Oh, okay. Oh, wow, that sounds horrible.
Yeah.
Oh, jeez. Yeah, I did not find a Wiki. Let me see if I can find it. It's got that for it. This is the best way to look at it. It's still running.
Yep. I don't know how.
There's no... Okay, it only has 10 rank. There's no way this
I'm sure all those people work
are the
for
ones
the company.
Here's
another one that I worked on a little bit. This one was actually... I mean, it was entertaining to work on. I don't think I ever actually watched a full episode of the show.
My watch list, just so that I can keep it in mind. And people.
This one was actually entertaining to edit, but I didn't edit that one that much. And this is the most famous show that they have, which I also have not seen a full episode of.
This has the same exact rating as the previous.
It's got 16 people reviewing it. Though, so.
Yeah, giving them a...
Because the guy that hosts that one was famous before he started hosting the show.
I feel like all these shows have such high ratings because everyone who worked on it gave it a 10 out of 10, and there were like 2 or 3 people who just gave it a 0.
So a few people who actually came across it and were like, what is this? This sucks.
Yeah, this last one's their most successful one.
I don't know if it's... Well, it's most successful in that it's the most well-known.
And people are probably... If they're actually...
But I think this is the show that's keeping this whole production company afloat.
I see.
Where are go back up. I want to see the reviews. 6 out of 8. Well, let's see how many more reviews it has.
Way more. It's keeping the show afloat. It's got... I mean, I'm interested. Oh, wait, okay, that's not the network. That's just the genre.
I'm not sure.
Would I find...
It's like Lifetime or something. Was the network they showed it on.
I don't have to edit that out, do you?
This is happening in America? Nah, I don't think so.
Would I find your name? Oh, wait. Do you have an IMDb?
No.
Okay.
I was going to say...
go up.
If you go up, that was the company that I worked for.
This one right here?
Yeah.
Okay, let's see this.
I do have a few... I mean, I haven't seen the full
credits.
versions, but I do have a few credits in...
Isn't there a much larger, like... I'm pretty sure you worked on a big thing that I might be able...
Yeah. I see what you're...
Am I allowed to name drop that?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, you once edited for Big Brother.
Mm-hmm. So that was because one of the friends that I was originally planning to go to LA with, he ended up being a game producer for Big Brother, and one of the things that he was producing...
So he came up with, like, the game premises? I've never watched the show, but I have an understanding.
It's like the #1 reality TV show. Like, I think it's the #1 daytime reality TV show. Which, you know, it's... I don't enjoy it, but it's cool that he's working on it. You know, it's like... Compared to what we were just looking at, it's like a pretty successful show.
It's on NBC, I think, or something.
I think
it's on one of the major.
It's on a major network, yeah. So he was a game producer, yeah, and that role was coming up with ideas for games for them to play, and then taking the steps necessary to implement those games. So
that's interesting. So, like,
because it's just things that you don't think about.
Don't even know what's going on. That's fascinating. Because whenever I see a show like that, I always imagine everyone's in on it. You know, they're just trying to make the most entertaining thing possible. But
well, a funny part about that show is actually I probably shouldn't say that. Well, I'm just gonna say it anyway. He told me a lot of people that work on the show just like also don't like it, but they do it because it's a job and it
seems like the most successful people in that field don't wind up working on stuff they love. Unless you're a director.
And unless you're like directing your own movies.
Yeah, if you have FU money, you can do it.
Do whatever you want. Yeah. So, and that's a really interesting aspect that until I knew someone who had that job, it was something that I'd never thought about. It's like whenever you see a game on like Survivor, it's like not only is it someone's job to come up with that game, where it's like, of course someone had to come up with it, but you don't think about the fact that someone had to be like, okay, what elements do we need? Like, what physical objects do we need in order to get this game played? How much will those things cost? Is there a cheaper way to do it? Like, what colors do they need to be? Will this color look good on television? Think like all these things that are necessary to think about that you don't, as just a viewer, you don't think about.
Yeah.
So he was doing this game that was essentially like spot the difference, or not spot the difference. So he would,
It's like when you have two photos and you...
it wasn't that. That was a bad way to describe it. It was more like, so they were shown a photo that was like absurd, and then they had like 30 seconds or something to look at it, and then they were asked a question about the photo. So he needed someone. So this, like, he contacted me like 1 week, and then the game was happening live like the next weekend.
Oh, wow.
So he needed like 40 different photos photoshopped over the course of like a week. So he was really clamoring for people, because this was like a last minute, like the show was going to be live. Like, this isn't something like where you can like delay the filming a week because it's a live reality TV show.
I didn't know they did shows like that live. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. So he really needed, that's like the only reason why he contacted me, is because he knew I worked in Photoshop, and the only reason he knew I worked in Photoshop is because he would like post stuff on Facebook, and then I would like comment Photoshop version of it, like kind of to make fun of him. So me making like cyberbullying this kid turned into a job for me.
Your meme game is strong. Yes.
Yeah, so it's kind of cool actually that worked out, and that paid really well. Made like a couple $1,000 doing that.
You put it on your resume.
Yeah.
Your name was on the credits, wasn't it?
So that's cool. But yeah, so he essentially would send me ideas and say, like, for this one we want person A and person B like on a bike together in front of the Eiffel Tower. And so my whole job, so I would like look for these elements in stock, like through stock photo websites, and then send them the ones that I thought were good, or they would send me ones they already had, and they would purchase them for me, send me the files, and then I would Photoshop them to whatever, to have the people doing what they wanted them to do. It was like a one-time gig, but you know, it was fun. I got the. And then
how did you get to know this guy again? Was it just through social media?
No, we went to school together.
Okay.
So he was, I can't remember. I think it was. Yeah, we went to school for 2 years together.
At OU, he was finished up while you were.
Yeah. So he only went to school for like 3 years. He graduated like a whole year early, which I don't know how he did that. This kid is amazing. Like, I make fun of him a lot, but he's genuinely like an amazing person. Like, as far as he's crazy. Like, he's going to be probably the most successful person I know. And like, so, and I'm like met all of my friends at Ohio University because of him.
Really?
So my freshman year, I got involved in this thing called AVW, which at the time was Athens Video Works, but it got mismanaged into the ground, and eventually they decided that they wanted AVW not to mean anything. And then I think that was my sophomore year, where they were just like, yeah, actually AVW just doesn't mean anything now. Like, why not Athens Video Works? Like, you don't have to. I'm not going to go on that rant. Okay. But so AVW was like one of the most successful so it was a student-run production, not a company per se, but a student-run production group where they would organize fundraisers, and they had equipment that students like who were a part of the group could borrow this equipment to go out and make stuff. And it was really successful for like 30 years, like since the 80s. Wow. AVW was like a staple of Ohio University, but the 4 years I was there, it totally tanked, and I don't even know if it's a thing anymore. Like, they couldn't get anyone to volunteer to be part of like the board that they needed, and the people that did volunteer, weren't getting any, weren't able to get people to fundraise, and then the fundraisers that they did do were just totally successful to the point where they was.
I mean, unsuccessful.
They.
You said the fundraisers they did were totally successful.
No, not successful.
Okay.
If I said successful, I did not mean that. I meant the opposite of that. Anyway, this guy, through AVW, started this show called Tour, which was essentially The Amazing Race, but on campus. So he produced it by himself. So what I mean by that is he had the idea, got the idea for the games, got all the people that he needed to get involved. Like, he organized this whole thing, which, it doesn't sound that hard.
Oh, there's so many things you don't think about. Probably.
Yeah, well, even the things that you do think about, it's one thing to say, like, okay, we need 3 people to run cameras, and we need 10 people to get involved, and we need t-shirts. It's like, that sounds like a pretty...
get that done.
Yeah, to actually get these things done, it's really difficult.
Yeah.
So this kid produced this whole show single-handedly, which is crazy.
That's the person who does most of the work, is the producer, I'm guessing.
Yeah. So
everyone else can kind of just show up.
Yeah. So I met basically all my friends. All the kids ended up being my best friends for the rest of my time at Ohio University. I met through this show Tour. And this show essentially is how he was able to get this job as a game producer on Big Brother, because it was pretty successful.
Oh, okay.
Because he had a lot of experience.
Is this on the internet or something?
I think there might be one episode on Vimeo. So it ended up being really terrible to watch.
But it's well done, though. Like,
we made 3 30-minute long episodes, and we actually had prizes and stuff to give to the people that won. So
how do you get the funding for this?
Fundraisers, and we found sponsors and things like that. We made t-shirts and put the sponsors like on the back of the t-shirt.
This does sound like a good thing for a campus like in Athens to get going.
Yeah, so it was a really cool experience. It was hard.
What was your role in it?
I was an editor and also a videographer, so I ran around with a camera following people as they were. It was hard.
As someone who knows very little about video production, that sounds like a lot of fun, but it's probably really, really hard.
And also helped like brainstorm games and just make sure things happened properly and people were where they needed to be when they needed to be there, and kind of kept them out of trouble.
What was the name of this again?
Tour, T-O-U-R. The O and the U. Were capitalized because it's Ohio University.
Okay.
Tour.
T-O-U. Yeah, I got it.
So, I don't know why I started talking about... I was talking about Chris. I was talking about Chris because of the Photoshop thing.
And then I think we were bringing this back to... So, you were depressed at your job.
Yeah.
You didn't like it. A lot of good stories came from that, though.
So this is just the recap of my past year that we're still on.
No, that's giving me a lot of good material here.
So, moved to Knoxville, got a job, sounded great, looked great, but I was unhappy with the job I was doing, and also I was unhappy just because I didn't have any friends. I had friends at work, but the other guy who was the closest to me in age was 10 years older than me. And he didn't have any kids, but he lived on like the other side of Knoxville, so I didn't really hang out with him that much outside of work. And not because I didn't like him or anything, it was just one of those things where it never really happened. And he had other stuff going on in his life besides hanging out with me, you know what I mean? And then another guy that I was pretty good friends with, like, had a wife and kids, so it's just like, he can't go and hang out at a bar or go see a movie on a Tuesday night because he was at work all day and wants to go home and hang out with his wife and children. Just like fair. So I would go home, go to work, sit inside in a dark editing room for 9 hours, and it's like most of the time I wasn't talking to people. I was sitting with headphones on,
Mm-hmm.
listening to these shows, these really bad shows, and just like doing this really monotonous work.
That sounds so depressing because
And then,
when I'll get hooked on a TV show or a video game and I like it, I feel depressed if I watched like 5 hours of it. To watch that much of a show that you hate,
yeah, that isn't good.
it's not good.
While also being like, a robot could do this job.
Yeah. In the back of your head, knowing like they've invented software for this.
Yeah.
And plus, I mean, 12 hours.
And I wasn't a perfect employee. I mean, I wasted a lot of time. I just didn't waste as much time as the people around me because I knew
I think that's the goal, just not to
not to be the worst.
Yeah.
But and part of the reason why I was kind of doing my best was because I knew if I didn't, that there was a chance that I wouldn't get this job full time. And of course, I want this job full time.
Yeah.
It's like, which is stupid. No, I did not want to do that job. So it was a blessing in disguise that I did not get that
I
job.
saw an Onion article that you remind me of. It's new employee still in the phase where he's eager enough to pick up coworkers' slack
Yeah.
or something.
Classic. I love the Onion.
I do too. I love the Onion. So did you leave on your own terms, I'm guessing?
No. Well, yes and no. So yes, in that I wasn't upset to not have this job anymore, and no, in that I probably still would have kept the job had they offered it to me. So it's actually a really funny story. So my last day there, I hadn't talked to my boss. So also another thing was my boss was just super awkward. Like, he couldn't have a straightforward conversation with you. If he wanted to say something to you, he would like kind of allude to it. Very non-confrontational guy, which is like a fine personality to have, but not the right personality for a manager.
Yeah.
And so I can't remember exactly the day. It was like March 31st. Let's just say March
2016?
17.
17, okay. Oh, yeah. Jeez, time's going so fast. I meant last year, but to me, last year was... Anyway, continue.
Yeah. So, the last day I was scheduled to work for my... so I had like a little contract, like the 3-month trial period where it was like they would give me employment until this date. And that date was coming fast, and I didn't want to go into this guy's office and be like, so what's the deal? Do you have enough work to keep me on, or should I be looking for other work? I didn't, and I had actually talked to some of my coworkers about this. I was like, should I bring it up, or should I just like hope it goes by and just come in? Because it was a Friday, was my last day, and I was like, should I just like not bring it up and then come in on Monday and hope no one notices and hope I get paid? And the consensus was, don't say anything, just keep coming in until they say, okay, don't come in anymore.
Yeah.
So that was my plan. My plan
that puts the burden on them.
Yeah. So I was going to keep coming in as long as there was work and as long as they weren't telling me to not come in. Mm-hmm. So this was a Friday, and we were having a company outing that day. And so the first half of the day, we worked as normal. It was like from 9 to noon, and then we quit at noon, went and got lunch, and then after lunch went to a like go-kart, like an indoor go-kart track.
Sounds like fun.
Yeah, so I got to do that for free. But at the very end of so we were there until like 5 p.m. And at the end of the day, my boss comes to me, and we had just gotten done with this indoor go-kart race. I'm wearing this huge helmet, and it's like crushing my glasses, and I can't see or hear very well. And my boss, who's like a pretty big dude, he's tall and kind of big, he's wearing this helmet that is way too small for him because the helmet was crushing my head.
Yeah.
And his head was like twice the size of my head. So he's got this helmet that's like way too big for his head on. And he comes up to me and was like, yeah, so you don't need to come in on Monday. We don't actually have enough work for you to come. So I was waiting all day and I kind of talked not kind of. I talked to the people that I'd worked with, and I was like, so should I just come in on Monday? Andrew, just let his name slip.
That's far enough. You're not gonna. You probably have already, and you don't even know it.
Yeah.
But continue though.
So I was like, Andrew hasn't said anything to me yet, and then they were just like, yeah. And everyone was like, he's not going to say anything to you on the company outing day. It's like, we're going go-karting. He's not going to fire you when we go-karting. And he totally did. It wasn't a firing. It was just like, your time is up and we don't have enough work to keep you on.
They won't fire you. They'll just stop calling.
Yeah. So it's just really funny that it's like he waited until the last possible minute to let me know that. Oh. And it was just like the fact that it was like after he was like sweaty from go-karting and had this big helmet on and like didn't even wait until.
I would love to know his stream of consciousness, like right when the day was coming to an end, where he's like, well, if I don't do it now, I'm gonna have to do it at the go-kart. He's like, well, I guess I'm doing it at the go-kart.
And so I went through, so I didn't have a job after that, and I was like, dang it, now I have to find another job. And it took me like another solid month to find another job. Actually, it was probably longer than a month. It was like 2 months.
Did you have enough saved up in between then?
Yeah, so I had enough money that I could pay my rent for a couple months. That was no problem. And I was eating. Yeah, I had enough money. That was no problem. And so I was looking for another video production job because that, my plan. I have to go back to my all-important, my important plan, my LA plan. I can't go wrong with my LA plan. The LA plan was everything to me. So I was looking for a video production job, but I was like, I need to be making money. And so there was this restaurant that was about a 5-minute walk from my apartment. I lived in pretty close to downtown Knoxville, so I didn't live in downtown, but I lived like a block away. So I was really close. It was a really cool area, cool apartment. And there was this restaurant I really liked called the Tomato Head, which
is a pizza place?
Yeah, it was pizza, sandwich, salad type thing.
Is it kind of like a deli style or a sit down? Oh.
It was a pretty nice sit down restaurant. Okay. It was a step above like fast food.
Okay. Kind of like I was about to say a location that would.
Yeah, kind of like that, but if it was if it wasn't a chain,
Okay, yeah. So it was a standalone.
Yeah. So there were 2 of them, but the one I was working at was the first one.
Got it.
So the reason I decided to get, so there were a few things that made me want to apply to this place in particular. It was a quick walk from my apartment, 1. Mm-hmm. 2, they didn't have a dress code. The employees could wear whatever they wanted, which was cool. I didn't want to wear some sort of zoot suit as a server.
And servers make good money.
Yes, so I ended up getting a job as a server, and I was making literally twice as much, if not over twice as much an hour than I was as an assistant editor. So this place was a close walk to my apartment. The food was good. That was another reason.
Mm-hmm. Had you eaten there before?
Yeah, a couple times. But it was a little expensive, so it wasn't a place I would go to regularly. Mm-hmm. So I had gone probably 5 or 6 times. Because by the time I got a job there, I'd been living in Knoxville for like 5 months. Mm-hmm. And another reason why I wanted to get a job there is because it had the cutest girls out of all the restaurants in Knoxville. I was like, I could work with some cute girls. That'd be nice.
I'm trying to put this into context really quick.
Sure.
Just hitting the pause button. This is in mid-2017?
Yeah, this was May 2017.
Okay. I had caught up with you in 2016 when our friend Wiggles had gotten married. Mm-hmm. And so was that before you had done the editing thing? Were you still in school, or
I can't. When did
that was
he?
August of 2016?
Yeah, so I would have still been at OU.
Okay. I'm just trying to put this all into context
Sure.
so that I can. Man, time goes fast. All right, so. Good.
So I apply to this job, and as soon as I leave, they call me and say, "Hey, could you come in for an interview tomorrow?" And I say, "Yes, I can." So I go in for an interview. All goes well, and they say, "Can you come in for another interview on?" That was like a Wednesday. They're like, "Can you come in for another interview on Friday?" I don't know why this restaurant
three
had
interviews.
two.
Okay,
So
two.
so
The first one was
I
on
applied,
Wednesday.
and I think so.
Yeah.
And I was like, "Sure, I can come in." I don't know why they had second interview. This place was pretty tight about who they hired and how they hired them. But so my thought going in was, I'm going to hate serving, but I need money, and I need a job. And I ended up really loving it. Like, I had a really good time working as a server. And I really liked the restaurant, and I really liked the people that I worked with. I made a ton of friends. So I went essentially from working a job that I hated, doing a job that I hated, working. I liked a few of the people at the place I worked before, but there was literally like two of them that I got along pretty well with. The rest I didn't really talk to that much, and I didn't like some of them. So I went from this place, bad work environment, not making much money, doing a job I didn't like, sitting in a dark room staring at a computer for 8 hours a day, to having a job where, and this place had big open windows. I was walking around, interacting with people instead of sitting in front of a computer. Not just people I worked with, but as a server, you're talking to people all the time. So I was interacting with people.
Do you remember the first table you waited on?
No, I don't.
When you first started, did you have like a supervisor there to?
Yeah, so I did 3 days of training.
Okay.
So it might have been more than that. I did some days of training before I went on by myself, and I had a little bit of a rough start. I didn't drop any food or anything, but it was just getting into the swing of it. There was a little bit of a learning curve, but once I got going, I was pretty good at it.
How long was it before you realized? Because it sounds like you really liked your time there.
Yeah.
How long was it before you realized, whoa, this isn't going to be horrible? This is actually all right.
I mean, so when I first started working there, I wasn't sure how much of it was like, when you first start doing a new job, you're like, it's like, oh, this is a new job. I'm good at it. So I wasn't sure how much of it was like the new job feeling.
Like a new car smell.
Yeah. I wasn't sure how much of it was that and how much of it was like, I actually like this job. Yeah. So after about a month of doing it, I was like, oh, I actually like this job. And it took me, so it wasn't an instant friendship with the people there. It took me a few months to kind of get integrated into the community. But once I did, it was really cool. I made a ton of really good friends, and it was one of those things where it was like being back in high school, because I would see the same people for like 8 hours a day, and then when we were done working, we would all go out to bars together, or we'd go to movies, or since my apartment was so close, a lot of times everyone would come back to my apartment and hang out, and then we would hang out until like 1 or 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, just drinking beers, doing kid stuff.
Yeah, that's really special when you have people you've got to be in a work environment for 8 hours and then see that much and not hate each other.
Yeah,
just,
it was,
and to actually enjoy each other's company like that.
Yeah, it was awesome. So I really love these kids, and I got, and over the course of like 9 months working at the Tomato Head, made some of like my closest friends. Like I had friendships by the end of that were as good as my friendships that I had from high school or 4 years at Ohio University, just because of how long we would see each other, and our senses of humor really aligned, which is weird because my sense of humor might be becoming more mainstream, but when I was in high school, it was like my sense of humor was not the thing that other people thought was funny, so I would like make jokes and people would actually laugh. Like these, and I think part of it was, I think, that I was one of the older, so some of these kids were in high school or younger in college, so I had a few years on them. And I think that might be part of it, is sort of like the Tim and Eric type humor seems to appeal to the some people that are a little bit younger than we are. And that's the type of sense of humor that I have. So, I'd make jokes that, and sometimes I would like kind of grumble them to myself, but then after a while, it's like I would start saying them out loud because like people actually thought I was funny, and it's nice to like work with people who think you're funny.
Yeah.
And it's like I got along with them really well, and so I ended up. So it was doing this thing that I thought I wanted to do, is how I started, and I hated it, and then I did this thing that I didn't want to do, and ended up loving it, and so it was about July of last year, so almost a year ago now.
A year ago, yeah.
Yeah, I was like, I had sort of like a quarter life crisis where I was like,
I've heard it. Those are a thing now. They really are. Those are. I've heard about them.
So it was sort of like a wake up call for me. I was like, I don't know. I did this thing I thought I wanted to do, and I hated it. And then I did this thing I didn't want to do and loved it, and am loving it, because at the time I was still working at the Tomato Head. I was like, I don't know myself. I don't know what I want. I don't actually know what I'll want to do, or how I would do it, and like what I would enjoy. Clearly I don't. Like, I can think I do, but it's different when you actually are in the real world doing it. So then I had to like totally rethink my priorities. I had to, and part of that was realizing that LA was not right for me. So I was thinking about the type of life I wanted, and the type of friends I wanted, and what I wanted out of life, and what I wanted to do with my time, and aligned that with, like, tried to look at how LA would accomplish those, and it didn't at all. So I had to like grapple with this fact that like for 4 years I had this group of friends, and we were all like, yeah, let's go to LA when we graduate, and that was our plan. And so I had to deal with the fact that I decided that wasn't right for me, and I had to tell all my friends, and they were all really disappointed, and they're still sad, and they're still trying to get me to go to LA, but I have to try to like tell them like it's not what I want out of my life.
Yeah.
It's like,
Are any of them in LA now?
yeah, they're all are in LA,
Okay.
all except one who's going to be in LA soon.
And they're trying to get you out there still, and like,
Not so much anymore, just because
you made it clear.
it's been so long and I haven't. Yeah, I mean, it's something where I'm not totally opposed to it at some point if I find some sort of success for myself out here, but it's not what I want. So, and part of that was having the experience at the production company where I hated my life and was really depressed. I knew going out to LA would be the same exact thing. And I knew not only would it be the same thing, but I'd have to work harder for what is essentially less money.
Yeah,
I might be
for a
making more,
worse quality of life.
yeah, but making more money does not translate to actually making more money in LA.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
rent, just
It's
the cost of
insane.
living in general,
It's insane,
it's absurd. And my friends that are out there, like Chris, who is this producer, worked like nonstop, like 80-hour weeks, and that's partly because of the type of personality he is, where he has the get it done, like, I want to be somebody, I'm competent, and I know if I put my all into this, I can become someone. And I have a lot of respect for that, because I don't know if I have that type of personality. It's like, I'd like to think that I do, but based on my past experience, my batting average shows that I'm not that type of person, which is fine.
Yeah.
But it's not the type of if you want to make it in LA, you need to either be super talented or super disciplined. I'm not super talented, and I wasn't super disciplined. I'm becoming a lot more disciplined now, but still I'm not disciplined enough to make it in LA. But I don't.
You don't see that as a bad thing.
Well, I don't see that as a bad thing, and I also don't see making it in LA
as success,
a goal anymore.
Yeah.
So it's like, even in my life when I was planning on moving to LA, my main goals were to be successful in some way, hopefully monetary successes.
Mm-hmm.
I would have liked and still would like to have financial success. I wanted to, but more than that, I wanted to have a family, wife and kids, and also have a job that I liked, doing something I liked. And part of going to LA was I'm interested in video production and movie and filmmaking. So if you want to get into filmmaking, the place to go is where they make movies, LA, or Atlanta or something like that. But all my friends were going to LA, so that was the plan. But I had to decide what was more important to me, the family or the possibility of having a job doing something in the film industry. And I decided that family and community were more important to me as a person, because I think at the end of my life, and I can't know this until I'm dead or dying, but I think when I think about what I would be happy about having done at the end of my life, I think I would be more happy about having a community and people I care about than working a job that I liked. So, I don't know.
Makes sense.
So I had to really do some soul searching, you could say, investigating what I wanted to do or what I wanted out of my life, why I wanted those things. Are those even the things that I should want? How do you know what things you should want? And this led me down a huge rabbit hole of philosophy and morality and religion and myth and all these things that I'm now super into, that I had to essentially, I guess I didn't have to, but I was presented with a problem. It's what do I do with my life? Why should I do that with my life? What is the best thing I could potentially do with my life? And, it's a big problem, and I took it seriously. And part of taking it seriously was trying to answer those questions, and not trying to answer them in whatever comes to mind type way, because that's how I got the half-baked LA plan. It was actually taking the time to think through them and figure out what the next best step would be, and understanding that those plans will develop over time, and just trying to make my best move in real time. And so I decided to move back home instead of going to LA. And now we're having a conversation.
When you say half-baked LA plan, how many people do you think coming out of high school or coming out of college have a half-baked plan?
I think 99.9% of people.
I would agree with that. Yeah.
And that's partly the individual's fart. Fault. Part and fault. Fart. That's partly the fault of the individual and partly the fault of our society, I think. And that's one of the major things I've been thinking about recently. I've been reading a lot of Carl Jung, and he talks about integrity, and not integrity in this is where the word integrity comes from, having a good moral upstanding. But it comes from the well-integrated individual, and the integrity and integration. So what that means is you do what you do, what you say, and what you think all align. And I think we have a big problem in our society of people thinking and saying one thing but doing another. And that leads to a lot more problems than you would think.
It sounds like it would lead to a lot of problems.
Yeah.
And I can, when you say, so if I understand this correctly, So, what you say and what you do, what you say and what you think are in contrary with what you do. If I understand what that's what
Yep.
integrity is.
Yeah, so it's aligning what you think and what you say with what you do. If one of his big quotes is, "You are what you do, not what you say you'll do." So I think what that means is kind of self-evident, but it applies to a lot of things in life. So if you say that you'll do a job and then you don't do it, you won't actually do that job.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you're not the type of person. You have to become the type of person that you want to become. And I think a lot of people think that I think a lot of people think that they are the type of person that they think of themselves to be.
I think I'm guilty of that.
I think everyone is.
It's really easy to get caught up in that. And
So you think that if you're in a situation that you'll do one thing, or you think that if you had $1 million, you might think that you would spend it properly, but until you are in that situation, you don't know what you'll do.
yeah.
And that's a problem.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people, it's a problem that people don't address. And I think a big problem in our country right now, and I don't know if this is a problem throughout history, across cultures, or if this is like specifically a uniquely American right now problem, late capitalist, like result of our culture, but people just kind of do what they think they should be doing. And they don't really think about what they're doing or why they're doing it. They're just like, "Oh, I need to get a job. I need money, so I need to get a job. What do I need to do to get a job? I need to go to school. What should I go to school for? Something, preferably something I'm interested in, but more than that, something I know that when I graduate, I can get a job with."
Mm-hmm.
But people, and I'm trying to articulate it correctly, and I'm not saying that this is universally true, but it seems to be true in general of people our age, that education has become less of something that people do because they're interested in education and because they're interested in furthering their learning, and more something that is done because it's a necessary prerequisite to almost any salaried job. And so that leads to people doing it not really thinking about why they're doing it, besides the fact that they know that they need a job in order to function.
Do you think that is a... what's the word I'm looking for? Do you think that's an inevitable consequence of capitalism?
I don't know.
I don't know either.
I don't think so. I think part of it is I don't understand. I'm not educated enough to really make any sort of statements on it. I don't know who is to blame or what can be done to fix it, but it seems like a bachelor's degree is
the new high school diploma.
Is the new the new
Or even GED. I would go far as to say that. And
yeah.
I've rambled about this before on my show. My bachelor's degree, and I deserve it for. I have a degree in philosophy, and it is,
which is interesting.
It was interesting, but even then, I feel there are troll lords on the internet who know more about philosophy than I do. Far more. I got roasted on Twitter one time.
What'd you say?
So, I had this Twitter account, and I went to the University of Cincinnati, and there's a tower there called Crosley Tower, and it's ugly. It was built in the 1970s, a dark era for architecture. And I started a Twitter account with that.
It's just like your opinion, man.
Yeah. So
as I drink my white rum.
Yeah. So I have this Twitter account, and there were like two other accounts that had a Crosley Tower set up, and prior to it being a Crosley Tower account, I had like several different accounts. I made it an Immanuel Kant account, who's a philosopher from Prussia in the 1600s or 1800s rather, 18th century, sorry. And so one day I had a few drinks in me, and I was like, I'm gonna go after these other two accounts. And like my account was all like self-deprecating about how like Crosley Tower is ugly, it shouldn't exist. And I told the account who had like twice as many followers as I did, I'm like, no, his description was, oh, Crosley Tower's great, and I'm like, no, it's not. It's actually ugly, and it should be dismantled.
Yeah.
And so he scrolled down through all of my old previous tweets, and I had like Immanuel Kant jokes back from when it was a Kant account.
Yeah.
And he said something to the effect of, "Oh, look, this guy I'm not gonna be able to do this justice, and this is why I have guests on so they can." But he's like, "Oh, look, he makes a philosophy joke as if to evoke the idea that his knowledge of philosophy goes beyond Jordan Peterson videos." And I was like, "Oh,
roasted."
That was like
roasted.
Because he knew nothing about me. He had no clue that I like Jordan Peterson. And yet it's like, all right, I gotta deactivate this account.
Rage quit.
Exactly.
Uninstall.
That was an example of it's like, you know what, I kind of deserved that. Because I started swinging.
You went beyond your means.
Yeah.
Out of your depth.
Exactly. And I was like, it's like when a kid gets beat up on the playground and he's like riding his bike home and he's like, you know what, maybe I kind of deserved it back there. I was kind of being a jerk back there. I shouldn't have. I poked the bear and it did not work.
Yeah. Paid the consequences.
Exactly.
That's pretty funny.
Where were we?
I was talking about integrity.
Yeah.
So, I just don't think people think about what they are doing or why they're doing it. I think they think about it on a very surface level, but I don't think it goes beyond that. And it is not because the average person is not smart enough to think at that level of analysis. Mm-hmm. I think that in general people are smart enough to have a pretty in-depth level of analysis of themselves, unless you're like in the bottom percentile of IQ, like 85 and under, where you're just like, I won't get into that. unless you're in like the bottom quarter percentile of IQ, you can understand the concepts of why am I doing this? What should I be doing and why should I be doing that? And our culture doesn't address that at all. No, it doesn't address it explicitly. It addresses it implicitly. Mm-hmm. And I think that's part of what religion is supposed to be doing. But this is another thing that I feel pretty passionately about. Is I feel like religion has been, Christianity in general, has been oversimplified, and so we, as a culture, we've oversimplified it, and because of that oversimplification, it's made it very easy to dismiss. Mm-hmm. And I think our generation is starving for meaning, and I think that meaning can be found in religion. And I'm a Christian, so, and part of me becoming, so I grew up in a Christian household, but I was never, until this past year, actually a Christian. So I would have said I identified as a Christian. Well, I wouldn't have said that then, but now, looking back, I identified as a Christian in that. In high school, if you had asked me if I was religious, I would say, oh yeah, I'm a Christian. Mm-hmm. But that didn't really mean anything. I went to Young Life once a week, but I didn't go to church. I wasn't looking at myself and thinking about what I could be doing better, really. I did it a little bit, but there was no repentance from sin in my life. Definitely not in college. And at OU, so I've always been interested in religion, and so OU I got my minor, and it's technically a corollary, but it's the same thing as a minor, in classics and world religions. And in that, I focused mainly in Christianity because it was the one I found most interesting, partly because I was raised in it. So I went from being a Christian with some doubts to being agnostic. There was a point in my life, this was like junior high, I was like pretty atheistic because I was in junior high. What do you like? What do I know in junior high? You know what I mean? So, high school would have said I was a Christian. Didn't really act any different than anyone else who wasn't a Christian. College, agnostic, because to me, logically, atheist doesn't seem like, if you're looking at it, and this is something I had to grapple with, but then to me, when I was looking at it, there was to me no way to prove that there was or was not a God. So
to make sure we're on the same page, I think an atheist actively believes that there is no God.
Correct.
An agnostic says, I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay.
So lack of evidence
is not evidence
against.
Yeah. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence.
Yes. So my conclusion was I don't know and I can't know. So agnostic. I wasn't going to rule it out. But I also wasn't ready to say like, oh yeah, for sure. Like a Christian one. So and that's where I was until about a year ago. And that part of becoming more of a Christian was part of that soul searching that I had to do. And this sort of dive into meaning and morality and what I should do and why I should do it. And I realized that I was holding a lot of implicit Christian beliefs that I couldn't hold. So I'm a very logical person. At least I'm sure I'm not as logical as I think I am. But I like to think of myself as a pretty logical person. And it's hard for me to believe something if I can't understand it. And that was partly why I was agnostic for a while. I didn't understand Christianity enough to actually believe it. You got a big spider.
Until about a year ago.
Yeah. Well.
Oh, holy shnikey. That's insane.
It's a big boy.
I gotta take care of that. Hold on. Okay, we're back. Sorry about that. Gosh darn, I don't know if I remember what you were saying.
I was talking about, I had Christian beliefs.
Yes.
So, and by Christian beliefs, I mean, there were, I guess, things that, in order for them to be true, necessitated a Christian, not necessarily a Christian worldview, but a world with a God that. So, I hadn't properly thought out the implications of a world without God and what that actually meant. When I was saying I was agnostic. And that was just because I hadn't really thought a lot of my beliefs or lack of beliefs through properly, like all the way out. And I'm sure I haven't still, but I've definitely thought about them more before. And this is, I mentioned earlier how I think our churches and our culture presents us with a simplified version of Christianity. And I think a symptom of that simplified version of Christianity is it makes it easier for people like me, who I think of myself as pretty smart. I can get tricked into dismissing these ideas, thinking where it's like, oh, I can't, there's no way for me to prove or disprove the existence of God. So therefore I'm going to be agnostic and just live my life however I want without understanding what the implications of a world without God really looks like. What the implications of a world without God really are. So, and by that I mean a world without any sort of transcendent moral values. So, a world with no objective morality, no any moral claims in a world without God are subjective.
What do you think the consequence is if humanity decides there are no objective moral truths?
Well, I don't know exactly what the consequences are per se, but I do know that you can't say things like the Nazis were in the wrong. And
You can only say it's wrong from your point of view.
Sure, but why should I care about your point of view?
Exactly.
It's like, it's nice that you have that point of view,
Yeah.
but it's meaningless.
Interesting.
And it's no one wants to say that the Nazis were right, but you can't say that they're wrong unless you have an objective standard by which to measure. There is no, everything is subjective. Your opinion on whether the Nazis were good or evil carries as much weight as your opinion on whether you like beer or White Russians. It has no weight.
Interesting. I will say, and as someone who, I don't have a dog in this fight, I don't, but I've seen many people from the, it's tough to say how I want to put this. Those from the, I've heard people call themselves moral nihilists, and yet they're still very against Nazis.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, how do you put your, I've never heard a proper rationalization or a proper...
So, the people who exist without religious beliefs who still... So, and I'm not trying to make the argument that you can't be a good person without believing in some sort of higher power, and because you absolutely can. But what defines a good person for a lot of those people are Christian values.
Whether they know it or not.
Whether they understand them as Christian values
but
or not.
Did it have to be Christian values? And at this point, the audio cut out. We will return with more of Conversations with James Freel right after this break. Please stay tuned. Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen. If you're listening to this, that means that you're listening to Conversations with James Freel. You probably already knew that, but what you probably didn't know is that this show is actually a spin-off of my regular show, simply and appropriately titled The James Freel Show. The James Freel Show is simply a show where I talk, ramble, and discuss anything that's on my mind, whether it be current events, what happened yesterday, or what's going to happen tomorrow. If that sounds like something that might interest you, please consider subscribing to The James Freel Show on YouTube, or follow me at James Freel Show on Twitter. If you've enjoyed the conversation so far, chances are good you'll enjoy my own podcast. So please, again, consider following or subscribing. Thank you for listening, and enjoy the rest of the show. Alright, sorry ladies and gentlemen, we are back again on the James Freel Show with Conversations with James Freel. Mark, you were just talking, please take over.
Yeah, so I was thinking a lot about morality, and so a lot of the atheists say that they can have, and when I say, I don't mean that they can't be good people without being Christian, but how did they define what it means to be a good person? And a lot of that is based in Christianity. A lot of and they would say that it isn't, but I would disagree. So people like Sam Harris. So I don't know if you're familiar with Sam Harris.
Yeah, I am.
But he's an atheist, and he claims that his moral standing is based in empathy and suffering and reduction of suffering. But then you can just say, well, why is suffering bad? And suffering is self-evidently bad, is what they would say. But is it like what besides it is unpleasant, is it bad in any sort of transcendent way? And especially if you think that the universe is ultimately meaningless, it's like, what is suffering?
Well, I
mean
guess
for the
if you
universe?
were to make the universe ultimately meaningless, you could take a utilitarian point of view, saying, hey, this makes me feel bad, so that's bad. This makes me feel good, this is good.
And also, so from the argument based on suffering, then you have to look into, so suffering isn't a cause, suffering is an effect. And if you're saying that effect is bad, then you're saying whatever causes suffering is bad.
Mm-hmm.
So then what suffering do we privilege over another? So say you were doing something, say you were eating 300 Snicker bars a day, and you did it, and if I stopped you from eating 300, you would suffer from it. That's a bad example, but you know what I mean. So maybe an alcoholic or a heroin addict, for example. I didn't mean to.
How dare you?
Yeah, I don't think you're an alcoholic.
I was talking about the heroin, not the alcohol.
So, if you take heroin away from someone who's addicted from heroin, they suffer. Like, there is a huge withdrawal that comes from taking someone who is addicted to something and taking that from them. But if you don't take that from them, they're going to continue to sacrifice basically their whole life to this drug. So should you privilege the suffering of withdrawal over the privilege of, or should you privilege the suffering of withdrawal over the suffering of a lifelong addiction until you overdose?
Interesting.
And how do you make that distinction? Should you privilege suffering in the long term over suffering in the short term, and why? And there are so many different things. Suffering is so subjective as well.
Mm-hmm.
So what causes suffering for one person, say me as an introvert, going out into a crowd of like 30 other people is a form of suffering. I don't want to do that. But going out for someone who's super extroverted and loves crowds and loves interacting with people in big crowds like that, if you deprive them of that, that would be a form of suffering for them. So it's a lower resolution version of morality than something like Christianity provides. And kind of piggybacking off that idea, I think any sort of moral claims inevitably result in an implicit belief in a God. And by that I mean God as defined as something, not even necessarily a conscious being, but a conception of something that is all good. So if you make any sort of moral claim saying that anything can be good or anything can be bad, whatever you make that claim on, if you're Sam Harris and it's suffering, then you would say things that are good are the things that alleviate suffering. So if you're saying that things are good or bad, then logically there's a thing that is the most good. So it's all of the things, whenever you're presented in any situation, it is the things that are good in that situation. Does that make sense? Am I making sense? So when you say that there is good and there is bad, you are logically saying there is a set of things that are the most good. And to me, there's no difference between a conception of the most good and a conception of God. So to me, it then becomes, well, how do you define what is the most good?
Mm-hmm.
And should I take Sam Harris's view, or should I take the view of this document that's been evolving over the history of consciousness and humans. It's like something like, so then it became for me looking into different religions and trying to understand where those religions come from and how they were formed. And this is where actually Richard Dawkins' idea of memetics came into play for me, which is funny because Richard Dawkins is an atheist, and I think he's an atheist because he doesn't take his own ideas seriously enough. So I'm trying to think of how to say this. So Richard Dawkins' idea is essentially that ideas evolve in the same way as people do. So the strong ideas survive. So if you look at the Old Testament, it's a lot of laws and rituals. But if you look at the laws and rituals that exist and compare them to actual survival tactics, so things like in the Old Testament, there's a law that you shouldn't poop in the camp. You should poop outside of the camp, dig a hole and bury it, or else God will punish you. Well, what does that mean? If you're someone living somewhere and unsophisticated, and when I say unsophisticated, I don't mean that they're dumb, because I think they were as smart as average humans are today, but they didn't understand concepts like bacteria and germs because science wasn't a thing. So you poop in the middle of the camp, and that brings disease. But you can't see the disease. You can't see the bacteria that is spreading throughout the camp. You just see that your loved ones are dying due to some unknown illness that you then attribute to God. So then you eventually are able to correlate pooping in your camp with sickness. But you know that there's a correlation, but you don't know the causation. So then it's a God of the gaps type thing. So you say, I did this and people died, therefore God does not like this. And then you see that with all sorts of rules in the Old Testament. So there are certain animals that they're told not to eat that would have caused different sicknesses. Things like that, where there is a practical utility in the beliefs. A good anecdote is malaria. So the word malaria means bad air. And it was called malaria, bad air, because the people, I can't remember where exactly it was, but the people who named malaria, when they went to swamps, so people would go to these swamps, and then they would come back and they'd be sick. They'd have malaria. And so they didn't know what the cause was, but the correlation was going to a swamp and then coming back and they were sick. So then they attributed the cause to the air by the swamps. They thought the air in the swamps was bad, and if you went to the swamps and breathed in the air, you would get sick and come back and die. But it wasn't the air that was bad, it was that the mosquitoes with malaria were breeding in the swamps, and then if you went to those swamps, you would get stung by one of those mosquitoes and then contract malaria. So the belief was effective. There was a utility in the belief that the air at the swamps was bad, because if you believed that the air at the swamps was bad, you wouldn't go to the swamps and you wouldn't get malaria. But if you were like, air can't be bad, air's good everywhere you go, it's like it's the same air. For me, it's like, I wouldn't, as a quote-unquote sophisticated person, if I heard someone say, oh, don't go to that swamp, if you breathe that air, you'll get sick and die, I would be like, you're a stupid village person, you don't know what you're talking about. And then I would go and then get stung by a mosquito and then contract malaria and die. So even though it's not right in the details, the belief in it has a utility.
Okay.
And I think that's what a lot of the Old Testament is beliefs that have utility in survival that led to the survival of the people who believed them and acted as though they were true. Because they were true, they're just not true in the way that they understood it. It wasn't that God was getting angry, it was that they were avoiding natural effects.
And so here's my question. So I think it's fair to say that when it comes to all of these beliefs of utility, and they were attributed to God, some beliefs that had very little utility probably snuck into that value system. What would you say about those? Because those tend to be the ones that atheists tend to criticize.
Well,
when they say, "Oh, don't lie with a man the way you lie with," or that's kind of a powder keg. I did not mean to go to that.
I don't care. Yeah,
I do though.
Okay.
And at the time, it makes sense, but how do you attribute for the times that change when technology makes things better? And this is me just playing devil's advocate.
So the thing with Christianity is there's the Old Testament and the New Testament, and the New Testament is defined by the fact that you are not. It's radically different than the Old Testament in that you had to obey these laws and makes blood sacrifices to atone for your sins. But the New Testament is marked by the fact that Jesus was the sacrifice. So this is what's so cool. And going kind of, I keep hitting this, back to kind of the point that I started trying to make is that Christianity is unique as a religion because it gives you an objective moral right and wrong. So in the Old Testament, it gives you kind of a theory of what we think is right and wrong based on cause and effect of what we've seen. But the New Testament gives you a person that is infallible. So whatever this person does, whatever this person says is right. Whatever this person wouldn't do is wrong. So you get that objective view of a moral right and wrong. And Jesus's whole thing was that the laws are just a shadow of the moral right and wrong. So the Old Testament laws that existed weren't the objective moral right and wrong. So if you make some sort of claim that gay marriage is wrong based on Old Testament laws, it's like it holds no water in modern Christianity. Right. A better way to look at it would be how do you think Jesus would treat people who wanted to get gay married? It's like, well, Jesus didn't judge people. Jesus was forgiving. He was gentle and kind. And he wanted to lead people to the truth. And the truth is that we are all corrupted. And that we all need to understand that we can say we'll do something. It's going back to the Carl Jung.
I was looking for the way to tie this all back in. That.
We can say we'll do something and think we'll do something, but what we really do is very often very different from what we want to do. And this is from Romans. Paul says that he does what he does not want to do and does not do what he wants to do. And
it's ringing a serious bell with me. I haven't been to church in a long time, but I remember that verse being...
Well, and it's...
Could you repeat that just so I hear it loud and clear?
I'm just going to look it up real quick. Paul says, it's in Romans. Something, I'm just going to...
Yeah.
Instead of trying to...
Please do, yes. But...
And you don't have to be a Christian for this to resonate. There's a human truth in the fact that people very often don't do what they know they should do. But
I don't think you have to be a Christian to recognize that.
No.
I think anyone who hears that, whether or not they it's obvious to many people. I think it's a very human struggle that we have.
Yeah.
That we say one thing, we do another, and it may take hearing that to realize that you're not doing that. That's what you're doing.
It's like, why do I don't know what the actual number is, but I'm just gonna say 90% of like New Year's resolutions fail. It's because you recognize that there's something that you're doing or that you shouldn't be doing, a bad habit, or something that you should be doing that you aren't currently doing.
Mm-hmm.
A habit, you could say it's a bad habit that you're not doing. So diet is a good example where it's like everyone's going to eat. What are you going to eat? A lot of people struggle, especially in our country right now. We have a huge weight problem.
Mm-hmm.
So in the early 2000s, the obesity epidemic was like, when you turned on the news, it seemed like you would see something about the obesity epidemic. We just don't talk about it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But it hasn't certainly...
It's still a thing. I mean, people are still fat, you know.
It certainly hasn't gone away, and it's probably... I'm not even going to say probably. It's gotten worse.
Yeah.
And people know that it's not healthy. It's not that people don't know that they're doing something objectively unhealthy when they eat garbage, but they're not disciplined enough to not eat garbage. So you don't have to be religious to know that there are things that you should be doing that you're not disciplined enough to be doing, and there's things that you are doing that you're not disciplined enough to not do. Mm-hmm. And so for me, Christianity is an objective view of what you should be doing, an objective view, and you don't even have to necessarily believe the transcendent aspect of it or the divine aspect of it to understand the utility of it, just from like Richard Dawkins' idea of memetics. So these ideas are literally the most evolved version of moral ideas in the fact that they're like the most recent major religious tradition. And I mean, obviously there are other things like Mormonism and Scientology, but they're the most recent revolutionary religious idea. Okay, so this is the Romans. It's Romans 7:15-20. It's, I do not understand what I do, for what I want to do I do not do, but what I hate I do. And I do what I do not want to do. And if I do what I do not want to do, I agree that the law is good. As it is no longer I myself who do it, but it is sin living in me. For I know that good itself does not dwell in me, that is, in my sinful nature. For I have the desire to do what is good, but I cannot carry it out. For I do not do the good that I want to do, but the evil I do not want to do. This I keep on doing. Now if I do what I do not want to do, it is no longer I who do it, but it is sin who is living in me that does it. A lot of
That's
do and
interesting.
do not.
Yeah, that makes it interesting that it's like how much a role linguistics plays in this, because that sounds like it could have been written beautifully in another language, but it didn't quite make the shot when it translated to English. Ladies and gentlemen, this is July 6, 2018, so people are shooting off fireworks. So if you hear that in the background, please understand. If you heard that from The Daily Show or the regular James Freel show, you know that. So I understand that you now run a youth ministry, or...
I would lead a Bible study.
A Bible study.
Yeah.
What would you say is your biggest influence in that?
What do you mean influence? So, like, why I'm doing it?
Not even why you're doing it, what informs what you preach there. And I don't mean to just use the word preach flippantly.
No. A lot of it is just thinking critically about, so kind of what I've been talking about, trying to understand what the text says and why it says it, because I believe that, you know, the Bible has gone through, I don't even understand how many different edits and translations to get to where it is now. And I believe that the people who are writing and editing the Bible put in and left in what was in there because it was important. So trying to understand why the Bible says what it says, how it says it, and how that can relate, how it can be made relevant to our everyday lives now. Because I think churches try to do that, and I'm kind of cynical just because I feel like modern church and youth groups have
Become a marketing scheme.
Well, they failed me in a way, because they present to us, and by us I mean the youth. They presented to the youth and people in general a very simplified version of what is a really complex worldview. It's not. I think that's a big aspect of it too, is that people think of Christianity as a religious belief, and it is, but it's not. That's not all it is. It's a complete worldview, and people don't understand how deep that worldview goes, and people don't understand what you give up when you give up that worldview. So you can say that you're an atheist, but when you say that, you don't get to keep all the individualist values that come along with Christianity. You have to replace it with something, and people don't replace it with anything. They replace it with Western culture, which is based on Christianity.
Christianity, yes.
So it's even atheism is a Christian atheism.
It's interesting. That's one of the major criticisms I hear. We'll be right back after this break, ladies and gentlemen. Due to the technical aspect of this that I learned from this, we will be right back. And that's going to do it for this episode of Conversations with James Freel. Thank you so much for listening. This has been the second Conversations with James Freel. We're going to have more. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.